Angel Heart is a 1987 American neo-noir horror film written and directed by British filmmaker Sir Alan Parker. The movie stars Mickey Rourke, Robert De Niro, Lisa Bonet, and Charlotte Rampling. It's adapted from Falling Angel, a 1978 novel by American author and screenwriter William Jortsberg, which combines the hard-boiled detective genre with supernatural elements. In his adaptation, Parker made several changes. He altered the title for personal reasons, shifted the timeline from 1959 to 1955, and relocated the second half of the film to New Orleans. Explaining the move, Parker said, "My motives for the relocation are not entirely unselfish because I felt that shooting in another Manhattan-based detective story would be tricky in that overly filmed city." I believe I first saw Angel Heart when it was initially released, as I was a huge Mickey Rourke fan back then, and Lisa Bonet's role in the film stirred up quite a bit of controversy. I hadn't remembered it being a period film, likely because in the 80s, there was a 40s revival happening. Many of the silhouettes and hairstyles we see in the movie would have looked right at home at the time. Recently, one of my viewers requested a costume review, which led me to revisit it. So the film holds up remarkably well with standout performances by Mickey Rourke, Robert De Niro, and Lisa Bonet. If you haven't seen Angel Heart yet, I highly recommend watching it before this review, as there will be spoilers ahead. Additionally, I've added chapters so you can always skip ahead. As with many of the historical films I've covered on this channel, one of the biggest challenges is finding interviews with the costume designer. So while the designer did make some in-person appearances, I couldn't locate any interviews where she specifically discussed her work on Angel Heart. Additionally, no costumes or props in the film have surfaced at auction, which is typically one of my primary research sources. However, I did discover that in 2016, Robert De Niro donated an extensive collection of personal costumes and props to the Harry Ransom Center at the University of Texas in Austin. Spanning from the late 1960s to the present, this collection includes over 3,000 individual costume pieces and props from many of his films. Unfortunately, while a few items from Angel Heart are listed on the center's website, there isn't a comprehensive digital archive of the costumes. I ran into a similar issue while researching The Shining. Many of the costumes and props from that film are housed in the Stanley Kubrick archives, but the collection is not fully digitized. Thankfully, some of the costumes are featured on their Instagram page. Fingers crossed that these collections will be digitized in the future, allowing greater public access to these treasures. So with that in mind, I've pieced together insights from Alan Parker's interviews along with my own observations. And while I'm slightly uneasy relying on a single primary source, I hope you'll find this analysis enjoyable and insightful. And while I'm not a historian, I will provide some historical context of the costumes as we go along. Now, let's dive into the costume design. Beyond the stellar cast, cinematography, and striking visuals, including symbolic motifs like the fans, mirrors, staircases, and trellis, the costumes in Angel Heart play a key role in the storytelling. They fully immerse the audience in the film noir world of 1955, starting in the cold, slushy streets of New York and later transitioning to the sweltering, steamy atmosphere of New Orleans. As Martin Scorsese once said, "The costume of the character is the character. The tie a man wears can tell you more about him than his dialogue." The costumes for Angel Heart were designed by Aude Bronson-Howard, a highly regarded New York-based costume designer with a career spanning over 40 years. Raised between Paris and New York, Bronson-Howard initially worked in fashion, including a decade with Yves Saint Laurent, where she created menswear for the French design house's U.S. market. After her time in fashion, she transitioned to costume design for film. Before Angel Heart, she had worked on a handful of low-budget films, including a box office flop directed by Bob and Harvey Weinstein. However, she soon built an impressive resume, contributing to critically acclaimed films such as Scent of a Woman, Carlito's Way, and Donnie Brasco. In 2011, she was honored with the Excellence in Commercial Costume Design Award from the Costume Designer Guild for Martin Scorsese's Bleu de Chanel commercial. And in 2004, she received the New York Women in Film and Television Award. Her work on Angel Heart also marked the beginning of a long-standing professional relationship with Robert De Niro, who she has worked with since 1985. Bronson-Howard continued to design for De Niro in films such as Analyze This from 1999, Limitless from 2011, and Heist from 2015, among others. Before filming Angel Heart, Alan Parker noted on his website that finalizing the costumes involved countless iterations for each character, developed in collaboration with Bronson-Howard and art director Christy Z. Every garment, down to each shirt and sock, was washed dozens, sometimes even 100 times to achieve the desired distressing. This painstaking process ensured that the costumes draped naturally, matching the film's period authenticity and the creative team's vision for a desaturated, monochromatic aesthetic. To enhance this effect, they removed all primary colors from the streets of the exteriors, extending this muted palette across sets and costumes to achieve the look of a black and white film in color. One of the details that Parker insisted on was historical accuracy, saying in a behind-the-scenes documentary that anybody who does a film set in 1955 often makes the big mistake of making every single thing look like it's from that exact year. Every single car is from 1955, every refrigerator, every shirt. The truth is, things are generally 5 or 6 years behind. Despite the challenge of designing for a large ensemble cast, the costume team also outfitted many background players. Parker recalls dressing 250 extras in period-accurate costumes on one Harlem shoot day alone. In Louisiana, however, using local residents as extras added an authentic, gritty realism to the production. While I can't get into all the characters, let's look at some key players' costumes in more detail. Ethan Krusemark. Parker cast the late actor Stalker Fontainebleau as Louisiana shipping tycoon Ethan Krusemark, choosing him locally in New Orleans. According to Parker, Fontainebleau arrived on set with a neatly styled, though slightly ill-fitting hairpiece, which cinematographer Michael Saracen thought resembled a small Davy Crockett hat. The director tactfully coaxed it off and back into its box, deciding that Fontainebleau's shiny bald pate was much more fitting for the character. Ethan wears a creamy white linen three-piece suit, a fitting choice for a southern gentleman of his stature, paired with a cotton button-down shirt and a burgundy necktie. By comparison, here's an example of a classic American two-piece suit from 1951 made from fabric by Dan River Mills, which was a historic textile manufacturer based in Danville, Virginia. This particular suit is part of the Metropolitan Museum's collection. Ethan dabs his sweaty brow with a handkerchief that he holds in his hand. Now, in my opinion, a straw-brimmed hat, something like one that was worn by Toots Sweet, would have perfectly completed his look. Interestingly, while many of the background characters wear hats to match the period, most of the principal cast do not. Margaret Krusemark. Margaret, or Madame Krusemark, also known as Madame Zora, is both a tarot reader and psychic, as well as the daughter of Ethan Krusemark. She lives a comfortable life with a servant in her New Orleans apartment. Elegantly dressed, she wears a loosely draped indigo two-piece linen ensemble that hangs neatly on British actress Charlotte Rampling's frame. The outfit features a button-down top with a sweet peplum and an embroidered leaf motif, paired with chocolate brown pumps and a matching oversized clutch. Now, I found this vintage 1940s gray striped two-piece jacket and skirt set on eBay that somewhat resembles the silhouette of Margaret's ensemble. Parker noted how effortless it was to work with Rampling as she moves serenely through her scenes, even while sweating under her 1950s wig in the humid atmosphere. Her makeup here is minimal except for her blood red lipstick and matching nails, but the most intriguing piece is her silver necklace featuring an inverted pentagram, a symbol that we'll delve into later. Epiphany Proudfoot. Epiphany is the daughter of Johnny Favorite and Evangeline Proudfoot. Though she's only 17 and already the mother of a toddler conceived during a voodoo ceremony, actor Lisa Bonet was actually 18 when the film was made. In stark contrast to the affluent lives of the Krusemarks, Epiphany lives in a poor, rural community where she works in the fields. She's also a mambo, or high priestess, having taken over her mother's role after she died at just 29. While Epiphany's clothes are in the correct silhouette for the 1940s and early 1950s, it's also possible that her dresses, especially the printed ones with the turn-back collar and dolman sleeves, are from the 80s, as rayon dresses like this were very popular during that decade. And while they are loose-fitting, they are still seductive somehow, as the slightly oversized dresses slip off her shoulder. Here's an example of a silk crepe paisley dress from the 1940s that I found on the website Poppy's Vintage Clothing with a similar silhouette. Another theory I have is that her dresses are handmade. When she pulls down her dress to her waist to wash her hair, you can see the raw seams, suggesting that her clothes may be feed sack dresses, a common style in impoverished rural U.S. communities from the late 19th to mid-20th century. By the early 20th century, flour sacks were produced in tighter weaves like percale and sheeting, and often came in various colors and prints, which people repurposed for clothing. Epiphany is often barefoot or wears simple leather sandals. Her hair, meanwhile, is worn naturally, sometimes simply held back with a hair tie. Happy spooky season! If you're a horror fan like me, be sure to check out my reviews of other horror classics on my channel. I'll leave a link to the playlist in the description below. Now, let's get back to the review. Louis Cypher. Although Alan Parker originally envisioned Marlon Brando for the role, casting Robert De Niro as the enigmatic client Louis Cypher was a major win for the director. While not necessarily symbolic, the name Cypher has interesting origins. It comes from the Arabic word for zero and is synonymous with code, as both refer to a series of steps used to encrypt a message. While Cypher only appears in 4 short scenes, 2 in New York and 2 in New Orleans, he only wears one costume throughout. I think this adds to the supernatural quality of the character, later revealed to be Lucifer, and that he can appear at will. According to Parker's website and interviews, Robert De Niro made many choices that elevated his character through the selection of wardrobe, hairstyling, and personal effects. His signature costume is comprised of a black wool 3-piece suit, a white shirt, a purple-red pattern tie, and black boots. According to the director, his clothes had been brought over from Rome, perhaps made by Torelli Costumes in Italy. Coming off the 1986 film The Mission, De Niro had naturally long dark hair and a full beard. Parker wrote, his now extremely long hair would be put in a bun until the final scene when we would reveal all. In the Harry Ransom Center archive, there's a mention of a gold ornamental hairpin made of non-precious metal. The prongs are cast in the shape of 2 dueling snakes. According to the notes, the hairpin may have been worn in the church scene, perhaps to keep his bun in place. The other piece of jewelry, of course, is Cypher's signet ring worn on his right hand, described as a gold ring with an amber-colored stone and pentagram design. Now, in one pivotal scene in the Italian diner, when Cypher is peeling an egg, we get a close-up of the ring. Made of a non-precious metal, the band is cast in the shape of 2 ram-like heads, which support the stone with a thin metal pentagram affixed over the stone. You remember that Margaret Krusemark had this symbol on her necklace, and you might recall that the jazz musician Toot Sweet had an inverted pentagram engraved in his gold tooth. The symbol of the ram or goat and the inverted pentagram are often associated with the occult, and the movie leans into the satanic panic of the 1980s. According to the book The Doctrine of Transcendental Magic, first published in 1854, a reverse pentagram with 2 points projecting upwards is a symbol of evil and attracts sinister forces because it overturns the proper order of things and demonstrates the triumph of matter over spirit. It is the goat of lust, attacking the heavens with its horns, a sign execrated by initiates. But of course, we also get a detailed look at his nails, which were the brainchild of Robert De Niro himself. According to Parker, De Niro wanted his character to have these false nails that grew longer each time you saw him, so he hired a Russian nail tech from Brighton Beach increasing the length by 1/8 of an inch in each scene. Parker said they would become imperceptibly longer as the story unfolded, but I think he was surprised that it would often be brought up in interviews. Along with the length, Cypher's nails are sharpened like claws by the film's conclusion. Additionally, De Niro wanted to have his eyes change color to yellow in that last scene and experimented with different lenses as they flew an expert in from London. When we first see Cypher in Harlem, his look is finished off with a silver-handled cane. In one version of the story, Parker wrote on his website that production had 20 different silver-top canes flown in from France from a store De Niro had discovered on a visit to Paris. But in another interview with the British Film Institute, Parker recalls that he got a call from De Niro, who found a shop in Paris with hundreds of walking sticks, and he had narrowed it down to 6. However, the sticks were $30,000, the equivalent of about $80,000 today. The director said that he sent someone with a Polaroid camera to take pictures of them, and they decided on one stick, which was quite expensive, but it was used in the film. Parker wrote that De Niro was so method that at one point during shooting, the wardrobe department packed up his clothes so that he could continue practicing at home. Harry Angel. Throughout Angel Heart, Harry Angel wears just 2 main costumes, though he adds and removes pieces from these outfits in different scenes, lending to the film a theatrical quality. Alan Parker shares on his website that Mickey Rourke, who plays Harry, initially had some creative ideas for his character's look and mannerisms. Parker writes, "In the space of an hour and a half, I managed to talk him out of having black hair, a Cyrano de Bergerac nose, a limp, and 6 suits he had personally designed with fabrics missing the film's period by about 20 years. He graciously accepted my suggestion that he stick to the acting." Harry's primary look is typical of a private investigator, a 2-piece gray suit paired with a shirt and tie, a brown leather belt, and Oxford lace-up shoes in oxblood or brown. The shoes look similar to a pair I found on Etsy described as vintage 1940s gunboat wingtip Oxfords with heavy broguing. Interestingly, he always wears the belt over the belt loops, possibly to adjust his slightly oversized pants. Since the film is set in winter, he's often seen wearing a tweed wool topcoat and at times 1940s-style spectacles and sunglasses. For some historical context, his suit mirrors this 1950s American suit from Lord & Taylor, the oldest surviving department store chain in the United States. According to the Met Museum where the suit is housed, the gray flannel suit, like this one from 1950, became an icon of the post-World War II era, symbolizing work and upward mobility as men returned from war and traded military uniforms for corporate ones. Harry's wardrobe includes 2 main shirt and tie combinations. His first look, a blue-gray cotton button-down shirt with narrow double stripes, is worn in multiple scenes, including his initial meeting with Louis Cypher in Harlem, his trip to Poughkeepsie, and his break-in at Dr. Fowler's apartment. This shirt, unironed with creases from folding, is paired with a wide, bold tie. Later, for his meeting with Spider Simpson, his visit to Coney Island, and his journey to New Orleans, Harry switches to a taupe-striped cotton shirt and a new tie with an Art Deco-style pattern held in place with a tie clip. According to the Vintage Dancer blog, by 1943, men had grown tired of conservative styles of ties and embraced bold colors and geometric designs. Maroon, green, brown, blue, and gold added vibrancy, while patterns in bright blue, red, gold, and brown brought joy to both the wearer and those around him. Harry's tweed topcoat, with its raglan set-in sleeves, is a reasonable match to this 1950s blue wool coat I found on eBay. And while I couldn't track down the exact vintage sunglasses he wears, Classic Specs offers a close reproduction, and his nose shields are similar to these 1970s Soviet-era plastic nose shields available on Etsy. His round reading glasses are nearly identical to a pair of gold-filled mid-century Olga spectacles from Dead Men's Specs. Very similar, in fact, to the Savile Row Beaufort glasses that Harrison Ford wore in the Raiders of the Lost Ark franchise. Throughout the shoot, Parker noted that Mickey, with his inherently scruffy style, had the unique ability to make even the most elegant suit look like a discarded potato sack, which made dressing him down an easy task. Indeed, when Harry arrives in New Orleans, he's soaked with sweat and promptly changes into his second outfit, which he wears for the rest of the film. Though the length of Harry's stay in New Orleans is uncertain, it's interesting that he only packed one change of clothes, though he does seem to have a few pairs of socks. He swaps out his shoes, which appear to be canvas with a crepe sole or gum sole. For his second look, Harry dons a white and light gray striped seersucker jacket. Though seersucker wasn't invented in the United States, New Orleans clothier Joseph Haspel Sr. began making men's suits from this fabric around 1909, and his company helped popularize the garment through the mid-20th century, particularly in the 1940s and 1950s. The rest of Harry's outfit includes loose-fitting linen trousers with a cuff, a cotton shirt, a leather belt worn once again over the belt loops. Underneath his shirt, he wears a white rib singlet, which he occasionally wears when shirtless due to the heat, pairing it with a handkerchief around his neck. In some promotional photos, Mickey Rourke is shown wearing just the jacket, pants, and singlet. As the second half of the movie progresses and Harry confronts his true identity, he becomes increasingly drenched in sweat. His once slick-back hair is dripping, and his clothes appear more soiled and saggier, culminating in the scene where he faces Lucifer and must pay his debt. Parker explained, "The subject is about the devil and hell, and I wanted it to get hotter and hotter as we get towards the end of the movie, as we get closer and closer to hell." As the credits roll, Harry descends to hell in a trellis elevator, dressed back in his gray flannel suit ensemble. If you enjoy this kind of content and deep dives, consider subscribing to my channel so you'll be notified when I release a new video. In the meantime, check out my video breakdown of the costumes in The Shining. As always, thank you to my patrons, and thank you for spending time with me. I'll see you in the next video.